Welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. Have you ever wondered what magic lies at the intersection of genres where science fiction meets fantasy or perhaps reality collides with imagination? What new worlds could we explore if we dared to blend the known with the unknown, pushing the boundaries of our creativity? In the realm of storytelling, it's not uncommon to find ourselves confined within these strict borders of genre definitions. However, what if these boundaries are merely suggestions, guidelines that we can bend, blend, or even break to uncover new narrative potentials? The truth is, some of the most compelling stories arise from such daring blends, where the elements of one genre serve to enhance and deepen the narrative of another. Consider for a moment a world where the mundane meets the miraculous. Imagine a historical romance infused with the intricate designs of steampunk technology, or a political thriller that uses elements of science fiction, not as the main spectacle, but as the subtle tool to enhance the storytelling. This approach to genre blending not only broadens our understanding, but also invites us to question and reimagine the possibilities within our own creative endeavors. So now let me introduce a creator who embodies the spirit of inventive storytelling. Hyrum Hawks is an engineer turned self-published sci-fi and sci-fantasy author who brings a unique perspective to his work, seamlessly weaving his technical expertise into his narratives. He dreams up worlds that challenge the perceptions of genre and storytelling. His books, including The Persian Asteroid and The Valley of Death, demonstrate how subtle incorporations of science fiction can transform a narrative, adding depth and a sense of wonder to the story without overpowering it. So as we dive into today's conversation with Hyrum, let's think about how we as creators can apply small but similar techniques in our own work. How can we challenge ourselves to think beyond the conventional to innovate within and even across the genres we love? So while you ponder that, I'm going to welcome Hyrum to the show. So hello, friend, and thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. It's been so long.
I know. I haven't talked to you in forever. And since this is your third time on the show, there should be some kind of award because you're the first person to reach the three-peat guest status.
Yes. That means I get the hat. There's got to be when you make a hat, I get the first one.
Fantastic. I think that's a good idea. So since you were last here, life has kind of spiraled in 20 different directions for both of us, and we'll kind of dive into that at the other end of the conversation. But go ahead and start at the beginning and tell listeners about yourself, just in case they haven't made it back to the other conversations we've had.
Yes, and if you haven't, you really should, because I probably said it completely different then. But basically, as you said, I'm an engineer turned author. I am the kind of person that always told stories and just didn't realize I was telling stories kind of formally. It was always just, telling the kids whatever tall tale came to my head and making stuff up, telling them, oh yeah, if you don't do that, then you'll get eaten by this monster. And they know I'm joking, but then they'll, that's part of the fun of being a parent. But one day I decided to listen to a podcast of writing excuses about writing, because got to teach my kids how to write, since they won't. Engineers are arrogant. But I started writing and have never looked back. I hit my 1,000,000 words over a year ago, and since then I've written some things I'm pretty proud of. The stuff before that I'm proud of, but wouldn't let other people read.
There's a big difference in that kind of work. I get it. I have work like that too. It's like, you know what? That was a good starting point. That's for me.
Yeah, and one of those stories we'll be talking about tonight. But the interesting thing about being an engineer and then beginning to write is it's nearly impossible for me to truly let fantasy go without some set of rules or some sense of logic. Because and maybe I've just embodied some of those, like the Sanderson rules of world building, but I've always preferred there to be rules. That's why I don't like Star Wars, because it doesn't follow its own rules. In one episode, they'll be doing something, and in the next episode, they'll defy those same laws of physics that they made up. So that's the curse of an engineer.
I was going to say, I think that's a very special brain that you have, because those of us with the lowly commoner's brain, we don't see those things and we get lost in the entertainment and in the fantasy world. And so we don't really pay attention. I'm sure there are plenty of other people who would catch that. I am not one of them. And
all I know is They wore air respirators on an asteroid in Star Wars. They just had a respirator and they were in the vacuum of space. Or is there a vacuum in space? Anyway.
Yeah, see, I never would have thought of that. That is so just beyond me. I'm like, oh, this is fun. They're in space, and so yeah, my vision is a little more narrow, I guess. But since you've been here last, you have 2 books out now, and both of them have really heavy doses of sci-fi or sci-fantasy in them. Has that always been your genre of choice, like, or where did your influence for those books come from?
Well, I don't know that I could write anything else, in a sense. I've tried writing some other things, but they just never feel like natural to me.
Mm.
I mean, I have multiple degrees in science and engineering. Outer space is my entire passion. Basically, if it doesn't involve my family, it's probably directed towards outer space. And so my influence comes from having read extensively in science fiction, but I also have always loved fantasy, and my favorite fantasy books have always been the ones where there's some kind of science involved. I love general fantasy, but I really enjoy that addition of like laws. That's my most recent book, The Valley of Death. That's why I just had so much fun writing it, because the rules for their magic I kept very strict, and I got to add in that technology would literally compete with the magic, and that added a dynamic that I just had so much fun with. As the technology advanced, the mundane technology, magic couldn't do that stuff anymore. So there's no such thing as a magic car in that world, because enough people could understand how combustion engines worked, and there hasn't been a magical bow and arrow in millennia. Though if you read the book, you might be surprised.
That's right. We're not going to tell you anything. No spoilers here.
No.
Yeah. So I'm going to just admit my ignorance here, because when we were talking about the topic of this conversation, you used the term MacGuffin, and I've always been familiar with the concept of a plot device that drives a story forward, right? But I didn't know that was the term for it, and so I was like,
Yeah.
oh, he used a word. So I went over and like quietly Googled it. It was like, oh yeah. So thanks for teaching me something. Appreciate you sending me in that direction. I'm never going to remember it. I'm never going to be able to use it again, even if it's $1 million question on Jeopardy. Like, I'm just out of luck. But you have used a MacGuffin as, in your books as you've written them and that kind of thing. So let's talk about that.
Well, MacGuffins, I think, are critical to most stories. There's always some kind of MacGuffin, but in science fiction and fantasy, often it's a huge, glaring thing. The One Ring is the most common MacGuffin in any book, or probably the most obvious. But you've got the Death Star plans in Star Wars. In my book, my first book, The Persian Asteroid, there isn't a specific physical MacGuffin, but there is the concept. There's a conceptual MacGuffin of asteroid retrieval missions. They are not actually important. I could replace that with 8,000 different concepts. The key to a MacGuffin is that it isn't so much that it's relevant to the story in this. You could replace it. So the One Ring could have been a bracelet. It could have been a necklace. It could have been a nose ring. Really, it would have been awkward, but really, a MacGuffin is replaceable by something else to do its job, and it's a plot device, like you said. It carries it. And in the Valley of Death, it was this. Again, I didn't have a true physical MacGuffin. It was the concept that there was this Valley of Death. The very name of it. It could have been replaced. I mean, they didn't have to go to a desert valley and explore it. It could have been a crater on the moon. It could have been a lost temple. And so whatever you use, plot devices are critical in any kind of story. And I think we underrate their use. But we also need to remember the coolness factor is part of why we do it. It wouldn't be as cool if if in Lord of the Rings the One Ring was made of it was a plastic ring, and maybe it had a little My Little Pony printed around it. I don't think that people are going to watch that movie. Okay, some people will, but not the, it's not going to be the serious business. It changes. It changes the entire feel, the theme, the tone of the show if you change the MacGuffin. So in Star Wars, you can tell the exact same story of Star Wars, but instead of a Death Star, it's just some kind of vague entity, and they've got a that can blow up planets if you use the Force and you're controlling it, but you need a focus device, and so there's some kind of crystal that they focus on, and that's how they control it. That's a MacGuffin, and it changes the tone. It becomes less technological and more, mental, magical. So.
Yeah, and you used yours, to kind of blend in your first book. You've got the political thriller side and the sci-fi side, right? And then you used it to kind of mesh those two genres together. So how did you make that work? Because political thriller and science fiction, I've never seen Tom Clancy, as far as I know, set any of his novels on a different planet. So how does that work when it came to putting those two together?
The funny thing is, I don't think it's actually. It's actually not that hard when you believe that it just works, because inherently setting works with, the setting is the sci-fi, but you can have a political thriller set doing something like that simply by the nature of choosing where the action will take place. And so I would say I do it. I blend them together most of all by comedy. I like to use some comedic timing and just a little bit of ridiculousness to break down barriers. When that is my favorite part of writing is when I make myself laugh, though that may be that I'm just a simple-minded person, but that's my favorite part of writing, in all honesty. So I think that you can make almost any genre work with any other genre if you're willing to play by both sets of rules, and that's where you have to find where the common ground is. Because in a political thriller, you got to keep the action moving, while in the science fiction, well, you can still do that. So you keep the action moving on this setting.
Yeah. Are there techniques that you find more effective than others when you are integrating your science fiction into the fantasy elements without disrupting a narrative flow? Because that's the trick. Like you said, it can be done. Yeah, there you go.
100%.
Yeah.
I write it so I think it's cool, and then I give it to people who aren't my flavor of crazy, so they can tell me where I assumed I was, that they were reading my mind. Because every author has blind spots, and you're never going to overcome some of them. I will always assume people understand things that I think they understand that they don't actually. And so having my alpha reader, my wife, who is A, not a scientist, and B, thinks in glitter and sparkles and joy, while I think in angst and darkness and, well, still comedy, but it's just darker comedy. If I have her read it first, it's like, oh, if she didn't get that, I'm losing 60% of my audience to some extent. Mm. And then I have other beta readers I've got writers groups, they'll read it and be like, hey, I had no idea what was going on here. The surroundings were fun, but what happened in this spot? Oh, well, I guess I just thought you knew. I'll write that part of the scene. And so I think that's when it comes to connecting anything together, not just choosing a genre blend. When you have someone read it, they'll tell you where you're missing, and especially make sure you have someone who is a fan of each genre read it, because then they'll tell you. So the people who love political thrillers can tell you where you bogged down because you were going too much into world building, because that's part of sci-fi fantasy. But the people who love sci-fi fantasy will tell you, and could you just throw in a sentence that explains this MacGuffin or that little Chekhov's gun or whatever?
Oh, yeah.
Because you got to shoot your Chekhov's guns.
Well, obviously. I mean, I know I do. Yeah. So do you think like there are boundaries that in like the publishing world, whether it's traditional or self-publishing, do you think there are boundaries that are like so strict that it makes it hard for books like yours that do kind of cross those genre borders? Like, do you think they're out there and making it more difficult, or do you think people are more accepting of that kind of art?
Honestly, it's hard to say. I know I am not a good marketer. I've I kind of just gave up about last January and just have not done that much. And so I'm not sure if it's just me or whatever. I do think that there's a market for it because I've looked, and some of the greatest sellers are genre blend. If you look at Dune, Dune is not pure sci-fi. It is actually quite a bit of fantasy, but it has a lot of political intrigue. So it's got a lot of different elements blended in, and it didn't fit really well right at front. They didn't know what to do with it, but happily they had a good marketing team and they figured out what to do with it, and it became one of the most important science fiction books of all time. But I think part of why it was so important as a science fiction book is it wasn't pure just science fiction. It crossed borders. It gave when you write a good science fiction. Okay, my favorite thing that happens is I'll get a review because I've gotten people to read my books that, like The Valley of Death especially, I've been much better at getting people to read it and review it. People who read it will say, this isn't mine. I normally don't read X, but this was fun and I'm going to read the sequel. And that's the biggest compliment I get, because if you don't like sci-fi but you liked my book, and you don't like fantasy but you liked my book, well, that means that my book wasn't your stereotypical book in that genre. And so maybe some pure science fiction fans, some pure fantasy fans are not going to be fans of my books, but I'm having fun.
Well, and I think that's really all that matters, because clearly you enjoyed writing the story. It's going to connect with somebody. I don't think that stories just happen for no reason. I think there's an audience for every story.
Yeah.
Trust me, some of the books that I've seen on Book Talk, I have thought, holy geez, like people actually want to read that, and there will be
Billionaire vampires,
dinosaurs and women. It's like, oh my, like they're
yeah. Did you see the COVID lover?
Yes.
What was that?
There's an audience for it because people are.
There was at least one person. Well, I hope most people were talking about it because they were so disturbed. But you know
what? If somebody wants to pick up my book and be like, "This is going to be so outlandish, I've got to read it," okay, by all means,
I'm good with that.
See, that's good. Just leave a review. I don't care. It's fine. Whatever. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Do you think there are some genres that just shouldn't be blended? Have you ever thought of that?
I haven't. That's an excellent question. I mean, some people are pure fans, but I think most genres now. Okay, genre being a very difficult word to define because it also changes over time. Because sci-fi back in the '60s and sci-fi today are not the same genre.
That's true.
But as far as I think you could blend almost anything. I mean, I've seen almost anything blended. There's things I'm not going to read. Like, in all honesty, I don't care for stories that are just too dark and brooding. Like, I've read some Harry Dresden, which is a fascinating take on, like, it's kind of a dark fantasy. It's got some subtle elements of sci-fi. Not true. There's really not sci-fi in it, but it's got some technology because it's in modern times, but it's got magic. It's basically Harry Dresden is Harry Potter, but if he was he was like a really investigator. He was an investigator in Chicago, like wearing the fedora and everything. He's very raw, and it's definitely R-rated. So that's when I hit that point, I was like, okay, I'm not reading this. But it was fascinating because it did blend genres. It blended the cop genre, like the investigator, with fantasy, and it worked. I like what, and the reason I bring this up is that author, I lost his name right now, but he was challenged, Jim Butcher, that's his name. He was challenged at a writing convention, and I have this confirmed from multiple sources, but he was challenged at a writing convention because they were arguing, and he said, a good author can take even the dumbest sounding idea and make a good story out of it. In fact, he could make a great story out of it. because they were all saying, no, you have to have a good idea or else you can't have a good story. And he said, throw it, give me the worst ideas possible. Someone said Roman Legion meets Pokemon. He wrote a very successful series with that as the premise, and it sells.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think with just about any level, like you'd have to have some pretty good imagination and dedication, right? And you might end up with like some sort of mental break at the end. But I think you're right. I think you could get away with just about any genre crossing. I think the only one I came up with, because when I've thought about this multiple times, I was like, any kind of mythological fantasy might be kind of hard to mesh with sci-fi or that like if you were going to be, but golly, I don't know. I think you could do it.
You can. I would argue that myth and sci-fi are actually the same genre.
Really?
Yes, science fiction and fantasy are the same genre. One's future, one's past. So
interesting.
Any technology, any sufficiently advanced technology is magic to the people that don't understand it. So if you were to take your cell phone and go back in time 50 years, people would be like, that's borderline magic. You go back 100 years, that's magic. You go back 200 years, you get burned at the stake.
Let's go say witchcraft, yeah.
There's a point. And so, like, just going back and wearing this shirt and then feeling, and they're like, what is this magical fabric? And it wicks water. It doesn't stay wet. This isn't wool. It's made of oil. I mean, that's sort of. Yeah. And so, that's fantasy. Fantasy and sci-fi are the same genre from a different perspective. Now, I know there's going to be people that's like, I'm trying not to be pedantic. On the broadest strokes, you can see that speculation as part of it. That's part of why science fiction and fantasy are almost always lumped together, because all fantasy is magical versions of a technology in a setting. Science fiction is magical technology in a setting. In Persian Asteroid, the only science fiction in that, it wasn't the asteroid retrieval mission. I've designed that. I have patents that I filed on that. The science fiction part was the technology they used to finally save the day at the end, which I won't spoil. But that's really it, is that they made a cool new technology that doesn't exist and we don't have the theories for it. But literally, you could read the Persian Asteroid and 100% of the technology in there, save for that one thing, is real and is based in reality. The most unrealistic part of the Persian Asteroid is that I made caricatures of some characters. But that's just the fun of it. That's part of being a comedy. Like the bad guy is over the top. I had my editor regularly like, are you sure this isn't over the top? I'm like, I nicknamed him Teletubby. Do you really think I'm going for realistic?
Right. That's a valid question. I think you're right, and you're actually. It's funny. You are not the first person this month that has come on here and said the same exact thing about sci-fi and fantasy. And he was like, same disclaimer. He was like, "Don't take it out on Jennifer. Send me an email if you've got a problem with it." And I was like, "Yeah,
we'll team up and fight them."
That's right. So there's at least two of you out there. But it does make me think, oh, there's probably more than just two of you out there, because I agree. Like, it's hard for me sometimes to remember where the lines are. And it's like, oh yeah, because your fantasy might be my sci-fi. I don't know, because I don't understand what's real technology.
To be honest, if you actually stop and think about the human body, we have microscopic creatures floating around in us that are assassins that kill rogue elements.
Yeah.
Is that not magic?
I mean,
we don't understand. We can't do it. We can't recreate it.
Nope.
That is either, you could call it sci-fi, you could call it magic. I don't know how the body works. Then you've got things like, you've got a lot of people. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. People can argue, but there are a lot of people that will claim, I do, this borders on conspiracy theories, but I'm just going to throw it out there for consideration, that there are telepathic abilities out there, that there are people that can see the future, that there are people that can do telekinesis using certain chemicals, and then they gain that ability. Well, that definitely is sci-fi. Or is it magic? Because we don't have any scientific theories currently that could explain how the human mind can do stuff independent of physical appendages. So where is sci-fi? Where is fantasy? It depends on how whether you believe that there are things that act outside of the physical realm.
Oh yeah, and that's a whole different podcast. Yeah.
Yes, it is, and we could put on our tinfoil hats.
That's Connected Conversations for Conspiracy Theorists coming up next.
Ooh, okay.
Hyrum is going to start his own podcast. Fantastic! I'm glad I could inspire this evening.
As long as we all at the end of the day understand, I do make fun of conspiracy theorists for a living. So my first book was written mocking conspiracy theorists. So I haven't published that one yet because I got to rewrite it.
I have to say that there are some, and I'm going to just kind of tangent for a minute, but like there are some conspiracies that they were theories at first, and then it was like, told you so. So I'm actually a pretty good conspiracy theorist filter, and I can tell you which ones are real after maybe about a day.
I found a meme recently it showed the pyramids with a giant hand squishing an orange on it, and I'm like, ha! That is the aliens, isn't it?
Okay, so my favorite pyramid meme was the one with Chuck Norris that was like Chuck Norris building his first sandcastle or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That was a good one. Okay, back on book talk here. So what is your next project? You've got your 2 books out. What's your next project, or which one you want to talk about?
Well, I have like 5 that I can't quite decide on. It's been a very chaotic couple months since I finished my last book. Starting a new job, family with some health problems. So I've kind of just been puttering around. I feel like I'm that guy you put on the robe, got the slippers on. I'm just like shuffling around the house like, I don't know what to do with myself. But the one that would fit this conversation the best is my possibly most ambitious and craziest story idea. And that is my Regency sci-fi romance. And you know about it a bit because I've thrown some of the concepts at you. But I wrote an 85,000 word version of this over a year ago during my million words, and I finished it, and I even had an editor read it just to be like, I need input. I need to know what I did and what I didn't do right. This is how I learn. And basically it was like, the editor came to the conclusion, like, here's all the things you did wrong. You got better as you went, but you need to rewrite it. And I was like, yeah, I can see that. But I've never let go of the idea, but I was like, okay, I did it wrong. I could see things that were just wrong, and I didn't know what to do. But the concept for me, that I found my first Regency back in 97, probably 98. I had a girl show me Pride and Prejudice, and I watched it to humor her. But at the end of the 5 hours, I was like, okay, I'm invested. So I don't like traditional romances. I like the snarky romances. I love Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is a masterwork in how to make fun of an entire society without being obvious about it. If I could write that subtly, I would be the most important satirist of the world. Yes. Satiricist? Anyway. So studying that, I've watched it often since then. In fact, I've gotten to the point now where me and my wife both think it's hilarious. It's hard to sleep some nights. We put it on the TV nice and quiet, and we fall asleep to it. Normally we're gone in 5 minutes, but every now and then I'm like not sleepy at all, and I'll just be like, wow, this is amazing. And so I've really had that in my head, but I can never get out of my head, like, and what if I did it in space? And what if there was borderline magic? What if I did this? What if I did that? And so I've got this concept, and originally I had a Duke who was big into space and needed a mathematician to do some kind of thing, but then he found an AI, like it was basically a phone from 100,000 years ago. They don't know that at the time, but it's this crystal phone that's got an advanced AI in it, the kind that can project holograms and interact with multiple people at the same time, which I do not think that's how AI is going to be, but it's sci-fi. So the whole complex thing came together. I tried to assassinate Napoleon at one point. It was a mess. And so I tried to do too much for one story. And when I finished, I realized I just wrote like a rough, I should have written a 300,000 word trilogy instead of a 85,000 word single novel. But I also knew it was wrong, and so now I'm trying it with the Duchess instead of the Duke being the powerful one. The Duchess, and she's recently widowed, and she's the one that with the AI, but she needs an engineer. I still want her to be the mathematician. She's the space guru, so she gets and she has an infant child. She's widowed, and then we've got the engineer, and he's making his way. I can see so much potential in it, and the key to making that kind of cross-genre thing work is you've got to acknowledge all the different rules. So in a Regency romance, first off, it's very proper. People, Mr. So-and-so. And you've got that, you have to absorb that genre. Now, I haven't read a lot of the modern stuff, but I've read most of Jane Austen. I haven't gotten through, what is it, Mansfield Park. Oh, that one's kind of heavy.
Yeah.
Northanger Abbey is the single best of hers for comedy. That's hilarious. Just satire. Anyway, so you absorb that. Now, my whole life has been absorbing science fiction, so that's not a problem. But then I've got to learn the rules of romance, because just because it's a Regency, I get Regency. I can write Regency. I can do the research. I understand the rules of their parliament and all that. Mm-hmm. But good gravy, romances are weird. And so that's the hardest part, is tying it together, tying the romance into it. Now, I did a romance in my second book, The Valley of Death, but the romance was integral to the plot, but not the plot. It was the character. It was a huge part of their character arcs, but the overall plot was still in charge. Well, this one, I'm not sure yet. Is the romance going to be the main driver and the plot just follows along? Or do I still want to have the sci-fi be a little more important, have the plot be a little more important, and then have the romance coming along for the ride? Or do I want it to truly be balanced? And those are the decisions when you do a cross genre that you have to make. The hard decision is, what is your dominating energy? What is the dominating tone? Mm-hmm. So my opening scene that I wrote has her, and I'm going to probably rewrite this scene like 80 times if I even keep it. Her husband dies. She delivers the baby, and then she is delivered the phone. And the AI, the image of the AI creature, the person, appears, and that's how I end the chapter. Well, that's that. So I'm setting up the tone, because I've got to, and that's for genre. This is the hardest part of a cross-genre thing, is that you set the tone promise for all the genres you're using at the same time. So you have to have your opening chapter, and especially your opening page or two, promise the tone of the whole book, but you aren't promising one tone. You're promising 3 or 2 or 5, whatever it is you're mixing. And so for me, I've got to make sure there's some romance, which that one's going to be hard because her husband dies in the opening scene. So maybe romance can wait a bit. I mean, it is a Regency, so it's almost implied there'll be romance, especially when the husband dies. Okay, so that we're setting up, so there will be a romance in the future. I've got to set up the sci-fi. So she's looking through a telescope at the opening scene. She's doing calculations. She's looking for all this stuff. But then you think those are just the only 2 genres, but when you blend a genre, you find that other things really come in. And so I think, honestly, I'm going to have some political intrigue, because who assassinated the Duke? Who assassinated the Duke? That's part of this. There's going to be, whether it's a mystery or whether it's a thriller, there's going to be some amount of that. And so that's what I have to open with. And so that's what makes genre blending fun, is that you have to do it all at the same time. Maybe I should write more of a single genre before I do all these hard genre blends, but I'd be bored, honestly, because that's what I've read my whole life. I've read the single genre, and you ask yourself, well, but what if? And so when I read Pride and Prejudice, I think, what if Darcy was a dragon? and Elizabeth was a dragon rider. And now you've got I wrote the first chapter of that. It's silly, but it's fun. It would make a great comedy. Considering Pride and Prejudice is a comedy too, but especially since Wickham is a wyvern in my version. And so you're settling, you want a dragon. If you want to be a dragon rider, dragons are the best. And, settle for a lesser creature. And maybe that's if you want to be a cross-genre reader or writer, then you've got to be a cross-genre reader and think of crazy ideas. Ask the question, what if? So what if the Roman legion and the Pokemon were blended?
What if? Well, and I think also you can blend genres and have a 60-30-10. Like it doesn't have to be, across the board, everybody gets an equal amount of genre sharing. I also think it's really funny, and I'm not offended that you think writing romance is so weird and hard. Like
it is hard. I don't know how. I read your book. It was so good, and I was just like, "What the crap? How did you make me so mad and so invested?" And I cried at the end.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
I mean, I'm not, but I am. But that's one of those things that I invest in my characters. My stories are always character driven. And so I develop their personalities. And so, when you're writing the genres, you also have to take into account your characters' personalities. And that's something we had a conversation about kind of, with this Regency type thing, because you have to figure out, what weight is this person going to carry in the story? And then at what point it's a balance, but it doesn't all have to have equal share. I mean, that's okay too. You want to make it more sci-fi than romance? By all means. Just find you a good, consultant when it comes to romance. If you know one. Only if you know one.
I think I know one.
Do you? Yeah. No, so but I do like the idea of blending genres, and I do it too. Let's see. Not Fall When You're Ready and not Wrapped Up in You, because those are the first two books in my series. But book 3 is pulling in more of a suspense. It's more of, there is romantic issue, dealios and relationships and that kind of thing. But the suspense is the undercurrent that kind of pulls it along, that moves the story. Because I just thought, why not? Something interesting has to happen. They can't all just be playing guitars and singing and falling in love. They got to do something. So something will happen.
So murder. Oh, wait.
Not quite. Well, actually,
never discount.
It's always an option on the back burner, just in case you don't know what to do. Kill somebody.
We're authors.
No, we can do that. It's fine. It's legal for us. Nobody else can do that. Okay, just authors. Just hear us out. We're not actually killing real people
that we know of. That's a fantasy book too.
Ooh, that is, yes. Absolutely. Okay, so we are to the point of the show where I'm going to offer one more time. Do you want to flip the script and become the host of the show, or do you want to tell listeners how you can connect?
I do have a question for you.
Okay.
If you had to take your first book and you had to make it a sci-fi, what setting would you put them in? So these are these are musicians. It's you got a musician and an author in this book, and they're on Earth. But what would you do if you had to do sci-fi or a fantasy? What setting would you put them in?
Wow. What a question.
And why are there dragons? That is a running gag between us. There always has to be dragons.
There's always a dragon involved. That makes every book better if you can write it. And maybe, okay, so the female main character, she loves writing, she becomes an author, that kind of thing. What if, as she's writing, she discovers that the stories that she's telling are actually happening somewhere? Kind of like the Never-Ending Story, like he's reading the book and the story is actually happening, but instead, like, she's writing her book, which, I'm just going to rabbit trail. I just rewrote, so in the book Epilogue, there's like an excerpt from her book called Matters of the Heart, and it's just like a little fun blurb in the epilogue. Like, I expanded it to like a 5,000 word short story this afternoon. I hadn't written in weeks, and so I was super excited about that. I digress. so everything she's writing about this, military hero woman who has become a contractor for the military once she retired from her service, everything she's writing is really happening. Like, that would be awesome. I love
Yeah.
that kind of storyline.
I think that was kind of the premise of Argyle, except it was that she'd remembered it. It wasn't that she made it happen. It's that she was a spy.
Ooh.
But spoiler alert. Yeah.
Oops. Yeah, I don't know that one, but that's awesome.
Since from what I understand, nobody watched that movie.
Except you.
No, I didn't watch it. I watched the pitch meeting. I don't watch movies anymore. I watch YouTube for the. No, I watch the 4-minute pitch meeting and then laugh, and then I feel like I watched the movie, and I don't. And I also feel like, wow, I dodged that bullet.
That's smart, actually. That's really smart.
A little cynical, but yeah.
I mean, honestly, I have yet to. I enjoyed Dune. That was the last movie that I watched, and I watched it at home. Like, I rented it and watched it because I hate going to the theater. My family loves it. I don't like it. I would rather sit on my couch wearing my stretchy pants. So we were sitting there watching it, and but that's the last movie, and it was really, really good. It was really well done, and I'm glad that I watched it. I'm glad I didn't go to the theater to watch it, but I'm glad I watched it. But aside from that,
it's a long time for a theater.
It is, and I don't watch movies, and so that's smart. Get the Cliff's Notes version, kind of, and the Insider Cliff's Notes version. So I like it. Okay, well, let's tell listeners how they can connect with you and your work.
Well, right now you can go to HyrumHawks.com. My 2 books are out, The Persian Asteroid and The Valley of Death, both in paperback and Kindle, or whatever audiobook or ebook. I think the second one will be other ebooks by then. But big news, The Persian Asteroid, by the time this airs, which I'm not sure when that'll be,
October.
Should be October. Then yes, by then for sure, The Persian Asteroid is available in audiobook. I actually reviewed the first chapter today or yesterday, and we'll be reviewing another one tonight. And by June, end of June, I should have it up on ACX and some other places, and so you can get it in audio form, and that means my children will finally read it, because none of them will actually pick up a physical book.
Yeah, the struggle is real, but yay for audiobooks, because that is something that I am about to launch a Kickstarter probably in June, so that I can start getting my books turned into audiobooks, because I write really long books, and apparently it costs a lot to narrate a really long book. Yeah.
But yeah, HyrumHawks.com.
Fantastic. And if you want, you can catch Hyrum on the Author's Dilemma podcast Thursday evenings live at 6:30 p.m. Central. And guess what? I will also be there with our friend Joshua Jack, because we all really like hanging out with each other, apparently, because we do it quite a bit. So you can catch us there as well. All right.
We're very snarky.
Yes, but we're also very wise and offer great insight and advice.
We're wise guys.
We are wise guys. Wait.
And gals.
Thank you. All right. I have one last big question for you, and it's going to just be game-changing for somebody. And if you get the answer wrong, then, well, consequences will be dire. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want listeners to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
You have the ability to do this, whatever this is that you're doing creatively, because if you like it, then statistically there are millions of people who are similar to you, and they will like it too.
Absolutely. That's why you can mesh any 2 genres together, and you're going to have an audience. Yay. All right. Well, thanks for being here and hanging out. I'm sure that I will talk to you again real soon. But in the meantime, I'm going to put all of your contact information, not all of it, but your contact information in the show notes so that people can find you. And I look forward to seeing what comes for you next.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.